Mainstream science has told us the same story for the last century. You are the product of a linear, slow, and random evolution that began on the African savannas. You are told that every part of your body, from the shape of your skull to the proteins in your cells, was molded over millions of years by pure, natural selection. But there is a secret hidden in the nucleus of your cells that Charles Darwin's theory simply cannot explain. In 2003, the International Human Genome Sequencing Consortium announced that it had completed the definitive map of our species' DNA. Scientists celebrated the milestone as the pinnacle of modern knowledge. However, behind the toasts and cover stories, geneticists were confronted with a wall of contradictions. The Homo sapiens genome contains exactly 223 orphan genes. In biology, an orphan gene is one that has no known phylogenetic ancestor. They're not in chimpanzees, who are supposed to be our closest relatives by 98%. They're not in gorillas, nor in orangutans. They don't appear in any other mammal, reptile, bird, or invertebrate on the planet. They appear solely and exclusively in you, in us. Evolution works through descent with modification. Genes are inherited and change slowly, letter by letter, through the ages. They don't arise from absolute nothingness. And yet, these 223 genes, which control critical functions such as the organization of the higher cerebral cortex and the advanced immune response, materialized in our lineage as if someone had cut the biological code from another species and pasted it into our DNA. What if the answers to this molecular enigma weren't in modern sequencing labs but buried under 3 meters of baked clay in the Iraqi desert? What if the creation story you were taught in school or at the temple wasn't a mystical metaphor, but the technical record of a bioengineering experiment? 5,000 years ago, in the land of Sumer, scribes didn't invent fables. In a sober, almost bureaucratic style, they inscribed a comprehensive report in wet clay. They told us who we were, who designed us, how much gold our manufacture cost, and why our genetic code was artificially altered. Western academics call it Sumerian mythology. But when you translate their words using the terminology of modern genetics, the myth disappears. What remains is a lab report. Tonight, we're going to read that report, line by line. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to write in your mind will forever change the reflection you see in the mirror. To understand how this knowledge came into our hands, we must travel back to the beginning of the 19th century. At that time, no one in the Western world knew how to read cuneiform script. Those strange wedge-shaped or bird footprint marks imprinted on clay fragments were considered mere decorative elements of barbarian peoples who lacked a structured language. Everything changed in 1835, when an officer of the British East India Company named Henry Rawlinson learned of the existence of a monumental inscription carved into the living rock of the Behistun Cliff in present-day Iran. More than 100 meters above the ground, ancient royal engineers had sculpted a massive relief containing the same political text written in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. Rawlinson, risking his life, hung by ropes over the abyss for months to copy each character by hand. The Behistun inscription became the Rosetta Stone of Western Asia. By first deciphering Old Persian, linguists were able to decipher Akkadian, and through it, they gained access to an even older and more mysterious language: Sumerian. The skepticism of the academic community at the time was fierce. No one believed that such abstract symbols could contain complex literature. Therefore, in 1857, the Royal Asiatic Society of London organized a definitive scientific experiment. They took a newly discovered cuneiform tablet of the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I and sent identical copies to 4 of the world's leading experts independently: Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hincks, Julius Oppert, and William Henry Fox Talbot. They worked without communicating with each other for months. When the Society opened the envelopes containing the independent translations, the result was irrefutable. all four versions agreed exactly on the syntactic structure, the names of the kings, and the chronology of events. Cuneiform was officially a direct window into humanity's most distant past, and what that window revealed left researchers breathless. In 1872, a young assistant at the British Museum named George Smith was sorting broken clay fragments from the library of Emperor Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. Suddenly, his eyes fell upon a tablet describing a catastrophic storm, a gigantic ship sealed with bitumen, animals rescued in pairs, and a dove sent out to find dry land after the total flooding of the known world. Smith entered a state of such agitation that, according to museum chroniclers, he began undressing in his office, shouting, "I am the first man to read this after thousands of years of silence." The Daily Telegraph immediately offered a fortune of 1,000 guineas to fund a massive archaeological expedition to Iraq, on the sole condition that Smith find the missing pieces of the story. Against all statistical odds, in his first week excavating through tons of rubble in Nineveh, Smith found the exact fragment that completed the Epic of Gilgamesh and the flood narrative. From that moment on, classical theology and history were thrown into crisis. The Hebrew texts of the Old Testament were no longer the oldest on the planet. Someone had recorded Genesis, the creation of humankind, and the great cataclysm 1,000 years before Jewish scribes wrote the Torah in Babylon. But while the biblical account attributed everything to an abstract and solitary God, the original Sumerian tablets spoke of a group of beings of flesh and blood with specific technical functions. For the Sumerians, the habitable universe was not governed by incorporeal mystical forces, but by the Anunnaki. Etymologically broken down, the word is composed of three clear Sumerian roots: An, heaven; Kai, earth; and Nuna, seed or offspring. It literally means, those of the seed of heaven who descended to earth. When we analyze the more than 30,000 tablets recovered from the Mesopotamian region, we discover that the Sumerians described these beings under a hierarchical structure identical to that of a contemporary corporation or military command. They were not omnipotent. They had physical limitations, suffered from ailments, competed among themselves for political power, consumed dense foods, became intoxicated with sweet beer, and required a heavy logistical infrastructure to survive on our planet. At the apex of the command pyramid was Anu, the CEO or supreme sovereign. His seat of power was not on Earth but in the heavens, their home planet or main orbital station. He was the ultimate authority, the one who validated colonial decrees and administered interplanetary justice. Operational command on Earth was divided between two half-brothers who maintained a bitter dynastic rivalry. The first was Enlil, whose functional title translates as Lord of the Wind or Lord of Command. Enlil was the chief of ground operations. His base of operations was in Nippur, the colony's logistical and administrative hub. He had no sympathy for Earth's native ecology or primitive life forms. His approach was exclusively military, bureaucratic, oriented toward discipline, resource optimization, and strict adherence to production quotas. He held in his custody the Tablets of Destiny, the so-called Me, which were matrices of data or normative codes that dictated the functioning of civilization and technology. The second was Enki, also known in Akkadian texts as Ea, he whose house is water. Enki was the chief of research and development, the supreme scientist of the Anunnaki. He mastered hydraulic engineering, metallurgy, physics, and above all, the biological sciences. His main settlement was Eridu, the oldest city in the world according to the Sumerian king list, built over the Apsu, the network of underground waterways and hidden laboratories. His symbol was the serpent, which in the ancient world represented the transmutation of life, rejuvenation, and profound knowledge, a perfect geometric metaphor for the double helix of DNA, which modern science would rediscover thousands of years later. Working alongside Enki was the key figure in human creation, Nintu, also known as Ninhursag, Lady of the Sacred Mountain, or Ninma, the Exalted One. Nintu held the position of Director of Bioengineering and Genetics. She was responsible for manipulating tissue cultures, managing cell incubation chambers, and correcting errors in biological transcription in embryos. Below this executive committee were the field officers. Nana, in charge of chronological control and the cycles of the moon. Utu, the supervisor of tactical justice associated with solar energy. And Inanna, a volatile female figure of immense political power who controlled advanced weapon systems and dynastic mating districts. This organizational structure is portrayed with stark realism in the Babylonian creation poem, the Enuma Elish, and in the detailed historical account of the Atrahasis. These texts explain that the presence of this detachment on Earth was not motivated by a benevolent interest in scientific exploration. It stemmed from an energy and resource crisis within their own ecosystem. According to the Atrahasis, written in Akkadian around 1700 BCE based on much older Sumerian chronicles, the pre-human landscape of Earth was one of colonial labor exploitation. The manuscript opens with a powerful statement: "When the gods were like men, they bore the work and suffered the weariness. Great was the effort of the gods, the burden was heavy, much was the anguish." The Anunnaki had divided their forces into two castes. The ruling class remained in the coastal and administrative urban centers, controlling the navigation channels, while a lower group of workers, known as the Igigi, was sent into the Earth's interior to perform the most destructive physical labor, excavating the beds of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to prevent devastating floods, and, primarily, drilling into the Earth's depths in massive mining operations. What mineral were they seeking with such desperation? The tablets constantly repeat one term: kugsig, gold. To 19th century science, the idea of space travelers traversing the cosmos to unearth gold from Earth's mines seemed like mythological absurdity. Gold was seen only as a decorative metal or a primitive monetary standard. However, 21st century aerospace technology offers us a radically different perspective. Gold possesses unique physical and chemical properties that make it the most strategic material for any advanced technological civilization. It is one of the most perfect and stable electrical conductors in the known universe. It does not corrode or oxidize, maintaining its conductivity intact under extreme conditions of vacuum or humidity. Furthermore, it has an unparalleled ability to reflect infrared and thermal radiation with an efficiency exceeding 99%. The windows of contemporary spacecraft, the helmets of NASA astronauts, and the reflecting mirrors of the James Webb Space Telescope are coated with atomic layers of pure gold to protect circuitry and lives from destructive cosmic radiation. If the Anunnaki's home planet suffered deterioration in its protective atmosphere, the dispersion of ionized gold microparticles in the upper layers of its sky would have been the only technically viable solution to filter the lethal rays from its sun. Earth, geologically rich and pristine, was the perfect source. The royal chamberlain, Kaukal, heard the shouts of the armed mob surrounding the palace wall. He roused Enlil in a panic. "Your house is surrounded. War has reached your doorstep." Enlil, terrified by the possibility of a civil revolt that would destroy the colonial infrastructure, barricaded the entrances, took up his defensive weapons, and convened an absolute emergency council in his audience hall. Anu descended from the orbital station. Enki took his seat as technical advisor. Nintu sat at the deliberation table. Enlil demanded the immediate execution of the revolt's leaders using tactical weaponry. However, Anu intervened, restraining his son's military impulses. "What do you accuse them of? Their burden is truly heavy. Their suffering is real. The clamor of the mines is unbearable." The logistical paralysis threatened to bring the entire colonial project to its knees. If the Igigi did not return to the mines, There would be no gold to save the sky of their world. If Enlil attacked them, he would destroy his own workforce. It was at this moment of peak geopolitical tension that Enki, the head of research and development, took the floor to present a proposal that would change the biological destiny of Earth forever. Enki addressed the assembly of Anunnaki leaders with these words, documented on tablet 1 of the Atrahasis. "Why should we destroy our own workforce? There is a way to solve this. A native creature, a primitive hominid already inhabiting this planet, is present here. Let us create a substitute. Let us create a human worker, Lulu Amalu. Let him bear the yoke. Let him carry the burden of the mines and free the Igigi from their servitude." The council listened to the proposal with astonishment, but Nintu, the head of bioengineering, interrupted, pointing out the technical limitations of the proposal. "It is not possible for me to create life from absolute nothingness in isolation. I possess the technique of the birth matrix, but the spark of higher intelligence is not found in the earthly creature. I need the collaboration of Enki. He is the one who purifies the basic substances. Let Enki provide me with the necessary biological essence, the cellular raw material, so that I can work with it in my workshop." This is where the Sumerian myth completely sheds its theological mask. Enki accepted the conditions and dictated the exact specifications of the clinical procedure on the designated days of the month. "I will perform a biological purification bath. Let a god of the rebellious caste be sacrificed on the operating table. Let his flesh and blood be processed in the mixing containers. With his blood and essence, let Nintu mix the earth clay. In this way, the DNA of the god and the DNA of the native hominid will be fused into a single genetic matrix." In ancient Near Eastern texts, the word clay, or wet mud, did not simply refer to soil mud. It was used to describe the basic organic matter, undifferentiated cellular tissue, the maternal ovum devoid of advanced information. The process of in vitro fertilization and cell hybridization is recorded step by step in the manuscript. Nintu needed the biological mixture, applying Enki's chemical purification compounds. Once the hybrid zygote was stabilized, the bioengineer divided the cell mass into 14 independent portions. 7 embryos were placed to her right and 7 to her left. To carry out the gestation of these first experimental clones, the Anunnaki could not use the womb of the native hominid creature, as its internal biological environment would have rejected the modified tissue. Therefore, they recruited 14 volunteer women from the Anunnaki caste themselves, called the womb goddesses, or surrogate mothers. 7 mother goddesses gestated the embryos coded for male sex. 7 mother goddesses gestated the embryos coded for female sex. The text introduces us to the obstetric incubation room. Nintu sat counting the gestation periods. The fateful 10th month approached. When the 10th month of the lunar cycle arrived, the womb completed its opening. With the surgical tool of precise cutting, Nintu opened the wombs. From the wombs of the goddesses were born the first 14 true human beings. The Sumerians called this first biological success the Lulu, which literally means the mixed one, or the Adamu, which translates as the earthling made of living matter. Ninma proceeded to manufacture 6 successive human prototypes with serious flaws in their coding sequence. The first prototype was a being whose hands lacked the joint flexibility necessary to hold tools. Enki analyzed him and assigned him as a court bureaucrat, a role that did not require heavy manual labor. The second prototype was an individual blind from birth. Enki compensated for his hearing and musical deficiency, integrating him as a psalmist and acoustic advisor in the temples. The third prototype presented a rigid motor paralysis in the lower limbs. Enki redesigned his work environment, training him as a precision craftsman in a fixed position on a stone bench. The fourth prototype suffered from urinary incontinence and massive chronic kidney failure. Enki developed a biological purification treatment to keep him stable in minor functions. The fifth prototype was a sterile woman with complete ovarian atrophy that prevented her from conceiving. Enki assigned her to the palace domestic service districts where pregnancy would have disrupted logistical operations. The sixth prototype was a being completely lacking external male or female reproductive organs, an intersex or asexual creature. Enki evaluated him and placed him within the caste of consecrated crown servants. This detailed account of trials, errors, and functional reassignments of individuals with chromosomal abnormalities bears no relation to traditional myths of perfect gods creating the world with a magic word. It is the exact chronicle of an industrial process of workforce optimization through laboratory manipulation. But the greatest logistical challenge for Enki and Nintu was not correcting specific physical malformations. It was a problem of industrial scale. The first armies of human workers were born sterile, like the modern mules resulting from the crossbreeding of horses and donkeys. Every time a crew of human miners died from workplace accidents or cellular aging, the Anunnaki had to halt operations, sacrifice a new specimen, prepare the organic clay, implant the embryos into the Anunnaki mother goddesses, and wait 10 months to obtain only 14 new workers. The system was logistically unsustainable in the long run. The colony needed the human worker to be self-sustaining. It needed to modify the Adamu's biological code to endow it with an autonomous reproductive function that would allow it to dispense with the Anunnaki mother goddesses. Enki returned to his laboratory on the Apsu. He manipulated the genome again, altering the basic chromosomal structure to definitively separate the functions of cellular meiosis and genetic recombination. Humankind received the ability to clone itself through the act of natural sexual reproduction. Reproductive Homo sapiens had been born. We had been unleashed en masse upon the Earth's surface to multiply exponentially. At this point in our investigation, we must ask ourselves the most rigorous question. If this account is real, if we are the result of artificial hybridization carried out hundreds of thousands of years ago by a superior civilization, is there tangible evidence within our physical bodies that attests to this molecular hack? The answer from cutting-edge genetics is a resounding yes. There are 4 molecular signatures imprinted on your DNA that completely defy traditional models of Darwinian phylogenetic evolution. The first signature is the one we mentioned at the beginning: orphan genes. In the discipline of comparative genomics, it was discovered that humans possess approximately 223 genes that have no correspondence with any other life form on Earth. For years, orthodox biologists attempted to argue that these genes originated from horizontal gene transfer through massive bacterial or viral infections in the past. However, horizontal gene transfer in higher mammals is an extremely rare phenomenon that affects only individual, non-coding gene segments. That 223 complex functional sequences responsible for dictating the growth of neuronal connections in the human frontal lobe could be transferred in a coordinated manner from a bacterium without negatively altering the rest of the vital functions is an absolute statistical impossibility. It is the equivalent of throwing a dictionary into the air and expecting the letters to fall to the ground, forming an astrophysics manual in perfect order. The second signature is even more spectacular and evident: the fusion of chromosome 2. All the higher primates on the planet, the chimpanzee, the bonobo, the gorilla, and the orangutan, possess exactly 48 chromosomes, 24 pairs in their cells. Humans anomalously possess only 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. We are missing a complete pair of chromosomes to fit into the family tree of terrestrial apes. Where did that missing pair go? In 2005, a comprehensive genetic study discovered the answer. We didn't lose any genes. What in chimpanzees are 2 independent and separate chromosomes, in humans are fused, joined end to end, forming a single massive chromosome. Human chromosome 2. The third signature is the FOXP2 gene, the so-called language gene. All mammals on the planet have a version of the FOXP2 gene that regulates basic muscle coordination. Between the laboratory mouse and the chimpanzee, separated by 70 million years of theoretical evolution, the FOXP2 gene underwent only a single amino acid mutation in its sequence. However, between chimpanzees and humans, supposedly separated by only 6 million years, the FOXP2 gene underwent 2 additional critical amino acid mutations in the blink of an evolutionary eye. These 2 precise structural variations are what allow humans ultrafine motor control of the muscles of the larynx, tongue, and lips, facilitating the articulation of abstract and complex spoken language. Genetic molecular clock studies demonstrate that these 2 critical mutations occurred suddenly approximately 200,000 years ago, coinciding with the abrupt anatomical emergence of modern Homo sapiens. Our communication processor was suddenly upgraded in the distant past. The fourth signature is what anthropologists call the Great Leap Forward paradox. The fossil record shows that Homo erectus inhabited the Earth for almost 2 million years, using the same crude stone axe, without a single change in its technological capacity or cranial volume. Evolution was stuck on a monotonous horizontal plane. Suddenly, some 200,000 or 300,000 years ago, that plane broke vertically. Homo sapiens appeared with a brain volume twice that of its predecessors, endowed with an instantaneous symbolic capacity, 3-dimensional cave paintings, ceremonial burials with offerings that demonstrate a conception of the afterlife, precision jewelry, and composite tools. There are no missing links showing a gradual transition of half a cubic centimeter of brain per generation. It is an instantaneous biological explosion. It is exactly what would happen if a team of modern programmers took the basic physical chassis of an ancient computer and, by inserting a state-of-the-art microprocessor and an advanced operating system, instantly transformed the device. The Sumerians told us this 5,000 years ago using the resources of their language. We mixed the divine blood with the clay of the earth. Modern science calls that divine blood advanced genomic coding of external origin. The biological experiment of Enki and Nintu worked beyond the expectations of the Anunnaki Executive Committee. Endowed with autonomous reproductive capacity, humans began to populate the surface of the planet at an uncontrollable rate. Mining and hydroelectric cities filled with bustling human communities. Tablet 2 of the Atrahasis describes how less than 1,200 years had passed since the release of the design when the Earth expanded and populations multiplied massively. The text employs a vibrant metaphor. The Earth bellowed like a raging bull. The leader, Enlil, was deeply disturbed by humanity's uproar. Enlil addressed the great council of the gods, exclaiming, "The noise of human beings has become intolerable to my ears. With their constant clamor and mass insomnia, they completely deprive me of rest and sleep." Enlil's reaction reflects the mindset of a colonial administrator watching insect plagues invade his factory facilities. He decided to exterminate the human population. First, Enlil blocked the climate control systems, unleashing a biological plague that wiped out populations. But Enki, the creator of the design, felt a scientific and paternal attachment to his work. He secretly intervened, instructing his most devoted human servant, the wise king Atrahasis of the city of Shuruppak, on how to implement quarantine measures and deep hygiene to neutralize the virus. Humanity recovered. Enlil, furious at the plague's failure, ordered the sluice gates of the advanced irrigation systems closed, withholding the monsoon rains. He unleashed an apocalyptic drought that lasted 7 cycles. The Atrahasis describes the suffering of our species with harrowing realism. The canals cracked, the fields were covered in white dust, people's faces turned greenish from malnutrition, and communities were reduced to cannibalism for survival. Once again, Enki defied orders from Central Command by operating clandestinely within the Apsu. He opened the floodgates of the subterranean waters and provided fish rations to coastal populations to maintain the core of the species' survival. Having reached the limit of his bureaucratic patience, Enlil convened the ultimate Anunnaki Council. He demanded an absolute and definitive solution that could not be sabotaged by scientific means: a massive hydrological cataclysm, a global flood that would completely wash over the planet's surface. To guarantee the operation's success, Enlil forced each member of the council, including Enki, to take a sacred oath of absolute secrecy regarding the data matrices of destiny. No one could issue a single warning signal to any human being. All swore under threat of military execution. Enki found himself trapped in a legal and technical paradox. He could not break his oath to Anu and Enlil without unleashing an interplanetary civil war, but he refused to allow the extinction of his biological masterpiece. He traveled to the city of Shuruppak and went to Atrahasis's residence. Instead of entering and speaking directly to the human king, Enki stopped outside the hut, positioned himself by the woven reed wall that formed the hearth's structure, and began speaking aloud to the wall, knowing that Atrahasis was listening intently on the other side of the thatched wall. The exact words are preserved, engraved on tablet 3 of the manuscript. Reed wall, listen attentively to my words. Hut wall, reflect on my message. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubaratutu. Immediately tear down your stone house, instantly abandon your material riches, and build a large ship. Disdain worldly possessions and actively seek to save biological life. Build a floating structure whose longitudinal and transverse dimensions are exactly equal in geometric proportion. Cover it completely with a reinforced deck, similar to the sealed structure of the Apsu. Place within it the seeds of all living things on Earth. Atrahasis understood the technical message transmitted through the wall. Enki had not broken the legal terms of his oath. Technically, he had not spoken to a human being, but to the ecology of a reed wall. Atrahasis's ship, which later biblical texts would transform into a pastoral wooden ark, was, in the original Sumerian texts, a massive piece of modular engineering. It had a perfect cubic shape, divided into 7 horizontal levels and compartmentalized into 9 vertical watertight sections. The internal and external surfaces were sealed using tons of bitumen and liquid asphalt processed in industrial kilns to ensure absolute impermeability to extreme hydraulic pressures. Atrahasis brought his immediate family aboard, but he also selectively recruited a team of master craftspeople from the city: carpenters, metalworkers, canal engineers, and weavers. He wasn't just saving biological specimens, he was preserving the software of human civilization. He introduced banks of genetic material from the local fauna and awaited the start of the event. The cataclysm was not a simple, prolonged rainstorm. The texts describe a total geophysical collapse of the Earth. The torches of the Anunnaki illuminated the skies with massive thermal flares. Hurricane-force winds howled like eagles on the attack, and the darkness became so dense that the sun vanished completely from the optical spectrum for 7 days and 7 nights. The waters didn't just rise from the sky, they surged from the deep oceans due to the tectonic shifting of the Earth's plates. Modern science has found the exact imprint of this global event. At the end of the last ice age, in a critical period between 12,900 and 11,600 years ago, known to geologists as the Younger Dryas, the planet experienced violent and extreme climate swings. Analyses of ice cores extracted from Greenland show that global temperatures rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in less than a century, triggering an instantaneous melt of the immense ice sheets covering North America and Europe. This massive and instantaneous melting caused millions of cubic kilometers of fresh water to be discharged into the oceans, raising the global sea level by more than 120 meters suddenly. Any coastal human settlement, Any city built in the fertile river valleys of the pre-flood world was instantly wiped off the geological map beneath hundreds of meters of turbulent water. Even the Anunnaki themselves were overwhelmed by the apocalyptic magnitude of the physical disaster they had unleashed. The text of the Atrahasis offers a striking image of the lords of the sky. They took refuge in their orbital ships and secure stations, but upon witnessing the total annihilation of the Earth's surface, they suffered from widespread thirst and hunger. The Anunnaki goddesses, including Nintu, began to weep inconsolably as they gazed upon human bodies floating in the global ocean like dead dragonflies in a pond. Why were the mighty creators of the sky weeping and starving? Because they realized too late the consequences of their administrative arrogance. By exterminating the human population, they had destroyed their own logistical infrastructure on Earth. There was no one to sow the fields, no one to operate the irrigation canals, no one to process the food, and no one to perform the biological offerings they depended on for their daily sustenance in the colonial temples. The lords of space had become slaves to their own labor force. The first thing the human king did was build a rustic stone altar, lighting an aromatic fire where he offered a sacrifice of meat and plant essences from the preserved rations. The Sumerian manuscript describes the Anunnaki's reaction with unparalleled satirical crudeness. The gods smelled the sweet aroma of the burning food. The gods swarmed en masse like hungry flies around the altar of the sacrificer. The lords of the sky, weakened after days of orbital isolation without terrestrial supplies, descended en masse upon the smoke of the food. Enlil arrived at the scene shortly afterwards. Upon observing the cube-shaped ship and realizing that a core group of human beings had survived the utter cataclysm, he erupted in a fit of destructive military fury. "What living being has managed to escape my decree? No human being was to survive total destruction." He turned to his brother Enki, accusing him of high military treason and violating colonial security codes. Enki addressed the General Assembly of the Anunnaki, defending the viability of his design with impeccable logic that disarmed his brother's dogmatism. "How could you, Enlil, supreme advisor of the gods, unleash a global flood without scientifically considering the logistical consequences of your actions? If a man sins in the future, impose his own individual punishment upon him. If an individual transgresses the norm, apply the sanction to him personally. But do not indiscriminately exterminate the entire species. Instead of unleashing a flood that destroys your own productive infrastructure, allow natural biological control forces of planetary equilibrium to operate." Enki proceeded to detail his proposal for the new post-flood world order. To prevent humanity from experiencing another noisy population explosion that would disturb Enlil's peace, Enki introduced 3 regulatory modifications to the biological and institutional software of our species. First, he altered natural female fertility rates. The text specifies, "Let there now be a category of women in the population who are congenitally sterile, limiting the mass reproduction of the lineages." Second, he introduced vulnerability to extreme childhood illnesses, personified in the texts as the demon Pasitu. Let there exist in the biological environment a factor of neonatal mortality that snatches infants from their mother's arms, naturally balancing the population growth pyramid. Third, he designed social and institutional structures dedicated to absolute celibacy. He established the priestess caste as Ugbatu, Entu, and Zikitru, women of high intellectual capacity and social status who were strictly forbidden by dynastic law from bearing biological offspring. Enlil, understanding that these measures guaranteed stable population control of the colony and ensured the continuity of the workforce without the risks of noisy overpopulation, accepted the terms of the agreement. He blessed Atrahasis and his wife, granting them a retreat of advanced cellular longevity in the region of the river sources, and validated the restart of human civilization. This transition to the new order is documented with mathematical precision in the famous Sumerian king list. The first 8 pre-flood rulers, who were either pure Anunnaki specimens or direct first-generation hybrids, exhibit artificial periods of rule totaling 241,200 years. Individual reigns of 36,000 or 43,200 years reflect the cellular longevity of the sky species. The Anunnaki knew that their time of direct physical presence on Earth's surface would eventually end. The dynamics of their own home planet and the directives of Anu's Supreme Council would require the gradual withdrawal of the colonial contingent, leaving the administration of Earth in the hands of the hybrid human kings who had been trained in the temple schools. But Enki and the scientists of his faction also knew that Earth is a geologically unstable planet, prone to periodic cycles of climatic cataclysms, comet impacts, and destructive ice ages. If advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, genetics, and physics were transmitted solely through texts written on organic materials or baked clay tablets, that information would eventually be destroyed, rotted, or completely distorted over the dark millennia of human ignorance. Therefore, they made the decision to encode advanced scientific knowledge on the only medium capable of surviving intact the collapse of civilizations, global floods, and the passage of geological time. Megalithic stone. If we cross the desert to the west, the Great Pyramid of Giza elevates this scientific encoding to an absolute level of geometric precision. Its base and height dimensions are not arbitrary. If you multiply the original height of the pyramid by an exact scale factor of 43,200, the same number recorded in the Sumerian king list for the period of a major precession cycle, you obtain the exact polar radius of planet Earth. If you multiply the perimeter of its base by that same factor of 43,200, you obtain the equatorial circumference of our planet with millimeter precision. The Great Pyramid is a perfectly scaled, three-dimensional mathematical representation of the Earth's northern hemisphere. Its internal shafts, erroneously called ventilation shafts by traditional archaeology, pointed with millimeter precision to the constellations of Orion and Alpha Draconis as they were positioned in the skies of the planet exactly 12,000 years ago, marking the exact date of the Younger Dryas and the great hydrological cataclysm of the flood. If we draw a line across the globe, we discover that the planet's major megalithic sites, the pyramids of Giza, the ruins of Petra, the Mesopotamian ziggurats, the temples of Persepolis, the archaeological complex of Mohenjo-Daro in India, the pre-Incan temples of Ollantaytambo and the Nazca lines in Peru, and the monumental platforms of Easter Island, are precisely located along a perfectly straight line at a 30-degree angle to the current equator. It is a global belt of stone that links civilizations that, according to traditional historians, never had the slightest physical or cultural contact with one another. They all shared the same mathematical framework, the same system of metrological measurements, and the same obsession with recording planetary orbits in stone. Why? Because all these cultures inherited, in fragmented form, the blueprints and technical knowledge preserved by the Apkallu, the 7 sages of Enki's scientific team who survived the flood aboard floating devices and dedicated themselves to rebuilding Earth's civilizational infrastructure from the technical memory of the pre-flood era. The Sumerian civilization did not evolve slowly from primitive nomadic communities. It appeared in the historical record instantaneously, fully formed, endowed with a complex legal system, highly abstract mathematics, advanced medical codes, and a structured written language because it was a planned reconstruction executed by technicians who knew exactly what they were doing. We have traveled through thousands of years of data transmission. We have unearthed the cuneiform tablets that lay dormant beneath the dust of Mesopotamia for more than 50 centuries. We have analyzed the technical chronicles of the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis. We have contrasted their terms with the signatures of modern molecular genetics, uncovering impossible orphan genes, laboratory-created chromosome fusions, and surgical linguistic mutations. We have validated the geological data that confirmed the global climate catastrophe of the end of the Ice Age. Having reached the end of this exhaustive historical exploration, we must shed academic and institutional dogmas to grapple with the ultimate question: what do you choose to believe? The official version of orthodox academia tells us that all of this is primitive mythology, poetic fantasies developed by primitive minds lacking scientific knowledge, who invented tales of flying gods to explain thunder, rain, and agricultural cycles. But there is a fundamental, insurmountable problem with this condescending interpretation of history. The Sumerians did not write in the language of mythical allegories. They recorded numbers of commercial transactions, logistical inventories of ore, the names of kings of physical cities that we have now excavated with shovels and picks, and precision hydraulic engineering plans. If we accept that their commercial records are valid historical documents, why do we arbitrarily classify as mythological fantasy the texts that explain to us with the same rigor who their teachers were and how they designed our genome in the laboratory? Accepting the original chronicle of the clay tablets means going through a profound identity crisis as a species. It involves assimilating a truth that is uncomfortable for Western philosophers and institutional theologies. We are not the sacred pinnacle of a divine creation of infinite love, nor are we the fortuitous and accidental product of blind and savage animal evolution. We are a deliberate biological design. We are the result of a high-tech labor engineering project, manufactured in the distant past by an advanced civilization to meet a very specific logistical need for energy resources and manpower. But in that same uncomfortable truth lies the secret of our absolute greatness. The Anunnaki made an irreversible miscalculation on the assembly line in the Eridu laboratory. By mixing the biological essence of their own caste with the organic matter of the terrestrial creature, they collaterally and forever bequeathed to us their own superior life spark. They transmitted to us those 223 unique orphan genes. They granted us the upgrade of the FOXP2 gene that endowed us with the capacity to structure abstract language. They provided us with advanced self-awareness, boundless artistic creativity, profound spiritual intuition, and the capacity for quantum philosophical reasoning. By giving us their blood, they gave us the intellectual tools to understand the universe and, eventually, transcend the directives of our own designers. We ceased to be mere tools the very day we learned to look up at the stars, not to tremble in fear on our knees in the mud, but to ask ourselves the ultimate questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? The Anunnaki, if they ever physically walked the surface of this planet, withdrew thousands of years ago into the depths of the cosmos, leaving us the keys to Earth's administration. But they left us their indelible signature engraved in cuneiform texts, their geometric blueprints carved into the megalithic stones of the pyramids, and, above all, their master code encoded in every helical strand of our DNA. The true origin of humanity is not a biological mystery, it is a historical secret. And the difference between a mystery and a secret is quite simple. A mystery is something we don't know at all, while a secret is something we know perfectly well deep in our cultural memory, but which we choose to actively ignore because we are terrified of the structural consequences of accepting the truth. For too long, we have chosen to ignore this secret, classifying it under the safe labels of pseudoscience, mythology, or science fiction fantasy. But the clay texts are still there. The megalithic stones continue to defy the passage of geological eras, and your own genome still carries the anomalies of the original design, waiting for an honest answer. We have completed the reading of the creation report. The information is now definitively in your hands. Now that you know the authentic chronicles of Adamu, the question is no longer whether you should believe in the Anunnaki. The real question you must answer in the privacy of your conscience is, are you finally ready to awaken from collective amnesia and remember who you truly are, or do you prefer to continue sleeping comfortably in the fairy tale you've been told? The decision is yours. The answers were always written in stone, in mud, and in your own blood. It's time to remember.